Welcome to our newest episode of our Zing Learning podcast. Today we have the absolute pleasure of speaking to one of our favourite clients, the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, and we get to speak to Jo and Bims, who are in the exec team there and who we have been working very closely with for the last 18 months to really help to bring to life the diversity and inclusion strategy with the team, not just the employees but also the members. We're having a really great chat today about what it's like to really embed a diversity and inclusion strategy and how actually making different changes really genuinely makes a difference to people's lives, not just in work but also in the outside world as well. If you're looking to implement a diversity and inclusion strategy in your organisation, then grab a cuppa, have a listen and see what you can take away from today's podcast. Hello, Jo and Bims. Welcome to the podcast. Lovely to have you here.
Hi, Zoe. It's nice to be here.
Hi, Zoe. Nice to be here.
Thanks. I'm giggling just because before we started recording, we were giggling and we were trying to pull ourselves together. But that's part of the joy of working with amazing people. So just to get our listeners to understand the work that we're doing around diversity and inclusion, I want you to tell me a little bit about your experience so far over the last few years to do with diversity and inclusion. So whoever wants to go first, please just give us a bit of an insight with regards to your experience with D&I.
Well, I think, Zoe, it's a good question, and it helps you sort of reflect over the last few years of where we've come from and we've achieved to date. We started talking around ED&I quite a number of years ago, and in reflection was a lot of discussion, I think, at the time. We would just kind of get, just like probably the rest of society, getting our heads around the topic, understanding it a little bit more and sort of unpacking ED&I. So we began the discussion, the debate, and I think looking back over the last particularly 2 to 3 years, we've started to put that into action and make a difference in terms of not only for the institution in terms of staff and our members, but also try to sort of raise our voice in the outside world a little bit more in terms of our wider societal aims. I think generally ED&I has become a more of a talked about topic in society, which has helped us along the way. But certainly, I think if I had to sort of summarise, it's gone from being a theoretical subject into one of action and experience for us.
Excellent. Thanks. Bims, what would you add to that from your experience?
Yeah, from a personal perspective, actually, I think it's been a really interesting, and always a word that's used quite frequently is journey. But I've gone through, from a personal perspective, and I'm sure Jo can identify with this, a range of emotions, being a person of colour, being female, and being in the HR field as well. There are certain things, expectations of you, and you're still a human being at the end, and you're still impacted by the injustices that you see and the injustices that you have to tolerate. But, alluding to what Jo said, having the opportunity to be part of a different path that everyone's choosing to take together has been humbling. It's been really enabling. And it's also been a big field of learning for me. If I'm honest, at times I was very cynical about things. I've been in the whole corporate sphere where it's the tick boxing exercise and the 2-day course and everything. And actually to see an organisation that's prepared to do something different and really live it out has been a really good thing for me.
I really agree with Bims on that experience part. I think what it's taught me and hopefully others is about listening, asking questions and listening, and you learn a huge amount about the other person or the group of people, which then determines how you behave, how you interact, how you may want to manage a team if that's what you do, or be part of a wider group. And that's probably one of the most important things I've learned. As opposed to the theory around ED&I, just that experience that Bims mentioned.
Yeah, wow. And there were a couple of things that you said there with regards to it not being a box ticking exercise.
Yeah.
And that's one of my favorite things about working with you. I guess I'm a supplier, but I feel more like an employee. I certainly don't feel like an outsider. And that's, I think, a really good testament to the culture that's already here. But it definitely doesn't feel like a tick box exercise. And that was a very early conversation that we had when we were discussing the learning element of it, which is, let's do something very tangible here that's really going to affect change. It's really going to make a difference to the employees, to the members' experience, and you've used the word, I think there, Bims, the human experience as well, which I think we forget in the working world, in our careers. We forget that ultimately we're all humans. We're multifaceted, got lots of different things going on in our lives. It's not always about that one project and things like that. So yeah, that was quite interesting. And it's definitely something I've enjoyed with working with you for over a year now, almost a year and a half.
I believe it's been that long already.
Yeah, it's produced such powerful results, literally almost from the beginning. I think people woke up and thought, I can learn something from this conversation. And I'm sure Jo's had this experience as well, where, members particularly, but also staff, even myself, has said, I was a bit cynical about this, but I know, it's my responsibility to attend, as a leader. But actually, I'm finding I'm learning and I'm having better conversations with people, with, grandchildren, with family members, with colleagues. And, I'm seeing from my perspective and our position, both Jo and I are seeing where staff are saying, well, we don't need to accept this behaviours anymore. And so our members are also saying that we should all be valued. And that's really important from the perspective of where we're both coming from.
It really changes your perception sometimes of a situation that you can't learn in a classroom. Is the only way I can describe it, perhaps. And I think it might sound a bit corny, but it touches. If you think about it, it touches everything you do. So the way you greet a person at reception, a client who comes to the building, to the way you perhaps if you get a slightly sort of a upset client on an email, how you might respond to that. Just taking that breath of thinking about the other person and the situation creates a different response. And I think it's very difficult to put, as I said, put that in a classroom, but you can learn it through it, developing experiences through things like the learning program.
Yeah, and those conversations that you're having. And it's interesting you bring up responding and take a breath, because that has been quite a theme, hasn't it, through some of our conversations. Rather than reacting, we're responding, which gives our brain a second to understand whether it's an objective reaction, actually the impact that we have on another person, all of those sorts of things, which is all about feeling valued and treating other humans as humans rather than as we perceive them to be when we first meet them. So the next question that I want to ask is around your experience before Zing came in. You developed an amazing D&I strategy, some really great actions that you needed to do and some really great kind of steps, very clear and concise, with a really wonderful person called Dr. Mark McBride. So you did some great strategy work there. What have you learned from that process of developing the strategy? So even before the learning came in.
It's a really good question. I think the strategy tries to give everyone a common goal, a common purpose, because ED&I can be a very noisy place. With a number of different agendas in there, with different strengths of feeling, etc. So I think the strategy was trying to get everybody at the IMechE, whether it's members, staff, volunteers, all on the same page, to give us a sense of direction. And those who wanted to join that journey with us, sort of some tangible actions to get there. I think there's always that question in ED&I, as we talk about it's good for business, and we all know, but there's something in there also where there's an expectation of, so what's the output? What's the outcome from this? How do you measure? And so one of the areas is around data collection. A lot of organizations sort of struggle with this topic, and when does data become meaningful? And then when do you take action on that data? So I think the strategies helped us create that common goal. But if we're honest, we're still working around of what does success look like? So we have a whole range of activities now, which are supporting perhaps our KPIs. But in terms of true success, I think that one's still open for debate about what that looks like. How do you measure a really inclusive and diverse organisation?
I would agree with Jo that it created a common place and a common way forward. However, I feel that it's only text and words. And you have to bring them to life. And I think we could easily have gone down that trap, fallen into that trap of many organisations of producing a brilliant strategy. And actually you look at it 5 years later and you think, what have we done with it? It looks great to the outside world. It looks great to our staff, to our members, but what's actually happened? And I think for me, actually seeing all the work that sat alongside it, D&I training, the values work, has actually brought the strategy to life. And you can see elements of those success along the way. So we're not there fully, and are you ever there fully? But we can definitely see that we've reached milestones. We can definitely see, and it's hard because a lot of those things are not necessarily tangible. They're not something that's measurable all the time. But what we've created is trust. What we've created is an environment where people are more respectful. And so by default, those other things that are so important, that data, which is data collection, is based on trust. People trust, are they ready to give you their data because they trust you? What are you going to do with it? But we're getting to that. And so I think the strategy is really good for keeping us focused. It's really good for actually saying, look where we come from. Also, it's really good because we made a public commitment at the beginning. And that makes us accountable. At times where we feel we might be drifting, we need to go back and look at that and say, what did we commit to do? As an organisation, and it's not just about us and the DNI. What's going on elsewhere in IMECI? And so, from that perspective, I think it's really helpful. But I absolutely believe that with any strategy, you've got to bring it to life.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I think that's so important. And the learning programme is those steps to bring it to life. Because we didn't before that, it was more theoretical.
Very flat, wasn't it? Very theoretical.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think what it did do, and it felt quite brave at the time, is that it actually rose our head above the parapet on the topic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before, perhaps we were a bit more internally focused, and actually by publishing something, people then sort of knocked on our door and said, "Hello, are you interested in ED&I? Let's chat." And so. I think that was quite a brave step, it felt like at the time, but it's opened almost a new world to us of an awful lot of organisations, both trying to improve the world, if we use our own mission statement, improve the world through engineering in ED&I, but also perhaps realise there's an awful lot of challenges, and when we be in partnership, we can actually do this better. So we've found a common ground outside of just engineering.
Yeah,
then which I think is for us has been quite unique.
One of my favorite things about working with the IMECI and there's so many different people that I get to meet on the workshops that we run is around that idea that it's not just about what we do at the IMECI, it's about how does that translate out into social impact. And Bims very early on, a moment ago, actually said about the children and the nieces and the cousins and all of that sort of stuff, where it's not actually just helping conversations internally, it's also in our personal lives as well. And I think something there around the conversations that we're having with people and the way in which I'm hearing the shift, because this is a program, we're not just scattergunning a few different workshops out there and hoping for the best. There's a very specific journey that we're taking people on. We're guiding them through. We know at the start they're very apprehensive to open up and talk about these things, but you get them a couple of sessions in and already they're sharing some really kind of personal things that we had no idea about, and it's really starting to open up that conversation. And then they're talking about, well, actually I'm really interested in it, and we get this a lot from the members, that they want to do some stuff, they want to take some of this learning back to their membership organization, and we're like, yes, please share this. This isn't supposed to be some secret IMECI thing that we're going to keep to ourselves. The idea here is to use the tagline again, improve the world through engineering. Let's also do that in a human aspect. Let's make sure we're having a social impact with the work and the conversations that we're doing. And it certainly is coming through there. You mentioned the word accountable a second ago with regards to having the strategy go out into the public domain and having people kind of hold the IMECI accountable for actually doing something with it. Do you think that is the right way to go if other organisations are listening to this now and thinking they want to go down the same route? Would you do that in the same way again?
Absolutely. I mean, for me personally, I've always thought, and I think what's quite unique about our leadership is that we do feel we're accountable, not just to our members, but also to our staff, that they look to us it's not about give me. It's more about how can we work better together to provide a nurturing environment, a safe place for everyone, to get the best out of everyone. And I think that starts with accountability. And I think even when I first started here, one of the things was that I said I'm accountable, and Jo was saying it. I remember distinctly a time when Jo talked about how she was accountable, and I think people need to hear that we're not just saying we want to be leaders for leaders' sake. We want to say that we're prepared to stick our head above the parapet, as Jo said. And we know that's happened because not everyone responds warmly or welcomes that D&I things or ED&I subjects. A lot of people are still trying to get to grips with it and understanding there's still a great fear around it. And, and that's all fueled by social media or whatever. But I think the people that see we're walking the walk, talking the talk, will understand that there isn't actually anything to fear. It's about us being better versions of ourselves, so that when we're at work, whether we're at play, whether we're in our companies, that we are actually able to be much more productive, much more fruitful in the things in our interactions.
I think, Zoe, in our recent annual report that was produced a couple of months ago, it felt the first time that the how we did things in the year was as important as the what.
Yeah.
And if in the document itself, the values sit front and centre alongside the business plan, the financial report, etc. And I get a bit goosebumpy when I talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's quite a shift to put about behaviours, the how, what our reputation and brand wants to be, alongside good financial resilience, meeting the needs of engineers, etc. And it all begins. It's like a piece of a jigsaw, isn't it? All sort of begins to fit together to create this, as Bim said earlier, to be accountable for how we do something as much as what we do. And I think if you think about IMechE, the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, the engineers and ethics is the most important thing. It's engineers can solve the problems of the world, but it's how they do it. Is it sustainable? Is it sort of ethically the right thing to do? And it sort of sits nicely all in that picture.
I agree. I think even international communities would want to know that we were not, and it's going to sound weird, not look down on them, but actually say, look, we want to do the right thing for you. This is not just a paper exercise because we want your membership. Actually, we want to recognise and value you for who you are, wherever you are in the world, that we do have those common goals that Jo's talked about.
It's really interesting. I had a session with our second cohort a little while ago, maybe a few weeks ago. And it was around understanding ED&I, and we go through we take them at the start of the journey. And as you know, because you've been through the sessions yourself. And interestingly, I discussed a little bit of the business case, but reminded people that, that's really important. There's some great stats. 67% of people will consider whether or not to take a role or to join a membership and things like that, considering how effective the D&I work is. So that's huge. That's so different to what it was a few years ago. So we'll go through all of those stats. And I actually had someone on the call say, the stats are good, but we shouldn't have to convince people that doing things right for human beings is the right way. And I'm like, absolutely, we shouldn't have to do that. So and we've got some very different mindsets that are coming in. We've got some very different perspectives, some different lived experiences. And as you said, Bims, very honestly at the start there, sometimes people come into this with is this really going to make a difference? Is this just another D&I thing? Is this just a whatever? Is this going to kind of die in a few weeks kind of thing? And we've had some people that have come into the first sessions, and on the feedback forms, they've said, I genuinely didn't think that there was any point coming. I did because I thought I should. But actually, the conversations that we had have made me realize that I need to learn a lot more about this kind of thing. So people are changing their perceptions of what D&I means, I think, as well as us just actually learning in general. And I think the way in which the IMechE built the strategy, then built the learning alongside the values and the behaviors, the new ones that have kind of really encompassed what it means to be a member or an employee within the IMechE. This journey just feels so organic and it feels so genuine. And I think that's the feeling that people that's definitely the feeling that people put across in the sessions that they have with me, for sure.
I think, Zoe, working with you in Zing Learning, it's created, from my perspective, a different type of learning and training. I sort of maybe thought, in the past, a bit more traditional types. And in a number of the workshops I've worked with you on and the others, didn't write anything down, because it was all about an experience I was going through and what I came away in terms of how I might want to change my behaviours, my thought patterns. Where maybe in other courses, I'm there scribbling away in a notebook because I'm writing down the theory. And it's that, I don't know how you describe that, but that translation into I don't know, the learning in a very different way than I would have perhaps done it. Active learning, yeah.
I would agree with Jo, because, I'm, being from my position, I'm very used to having someone who did D&I working in the department, etc. So almost you become a little bit complacent and blasé, and to the point where, if I'm honest, even I don't necessarily went in with the mindset that I could learn anything new on some subjects. And also because I think, well, do I know everything about racism because I've been a victim of it? But actually, going in and listening to someone like Jo's story or someone else's story, I'm thinking, hey, what about my behaviours to someone else? It doesn't matter that they don't fit the traditional, the traditional framework of what someone that's being discriminated against, but they are being discriminated against. And it's my biases that are causing that discrimination. And that really challenged me, even to the point when I think when I'm getting on the tube or the bus or something, have I judged someone? And it did bring back a memory of things where, it's so easy for us to fall into these biases without even thinking. But actually, we can be advocates of change because we're stopping and doing that pause that Jo has said. And we could say to someone, well, hey, let's not judge that person like that. Where is that person coming from? How do we give them that sense of belonging so there's less pulling, tugging and pulling? And that, I think that's the really powerful things that comes out of the sessions. And I think from day one, we all set out to make it a partnership, and we were very clear on that. We wanted a partnership with Zing Learning. And I think out of everybody, I think Zing did stand out to be that it would be there for the longer term, and we would fall together on some things, and we'd think, oh, that didn't work so well, but we'd go back. You wouldn't just carry on regardless because you've got a preset program, and I think that's the really powerful thing about learning together, is that you do learn together. Each child is different, and a parent would have to adapt to each child. Yeah. And I think we've done that with you, and we will continue to do it as we go through the different cohorts, because we talked about making the adjustments for each cohort, because some are in this their phase of their life, or some might be in a different phase of their life. But the important thing is, referring back to what Jo said earlier, is that we all have the same destination and the same goals. I don't think it's a single goal. I think it's more than that, because the values is one aspect, how we do our work, how we work together. There's so many different aspects, but it's been like this rich tapestry throughout. And I think that's a really powerful thing about learning and the evaluation of learning. That's really coming out, I think.
Bims, if you think about looking back, that sort of first 3-4 months at the beginning, when we started to work with Zoe, and we put together the early adopters group, and we spent that time thinking, how's this going to work? And looking back in hindsight, that was probably one of the most valuable bits, is actually talking to members and staff and working with us all to actually how we're going to make sure we achieve what we want. And I think rather than go straight into let's run 6 courses, and I think looking back now, that really sort of resonates with what you just said. Yeah,
I think the power of consultation, if you want to use that word, or the discussion, really brings about belonging. Because it would be easy for you, Zoe, to come to the executive or to HR and say, here, I've designed a course for you. Would that do? Does that fit your strategy? Does that tick off that? And we could go, yes. And you could deliver it in 2 days and everyone would be happy, because in a year's time, the whole organisation's been through it. But actually, it's about the legacy and passing on the baton. We've always said that, we have to respect that wonderful, rich heritage that we have, but we shouldn't be a hostage to it, because there are things in there that when you look back would not have allowed a woman to be an engineer, would not have allowed a young child to dream of being an engineer. But that's because of that time. But what we have now is someone being able to inspire to go to the schools and say, why not? Why not you? Why can't you be a mathematician? Why can't you be an engineer? I feel that people are more comfortable now saying that. And I do believe that's going to be a big payoff in times to come, when we will be forming partnerships with others, and we're saying, we can form a partnership with you because we're like-minded. And if you want to bring engineers into the world, we're ready to work with you and to make sure that through membership, through staff, whatever, that we're working together to improve this world. Because it's not just about the physical, it's about the social aspects of it as well.
Yeah. Bims, if we want to be, as an institution here in 50 or 100 years' time, we need to be relevant. And that's the perfect way to be relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. To the humans out there, the other humans.
To the other humans, absolutely.
Yeah, that's it. You mentioned the word partnership there, and I know we're all completely agree. There's probably going to be lots of head nods for the listeners. We were very clear about that right from the start. And I think it's really interesting because I've definitely had offers of work, and clients have come to me and said, oh, can you pull this together, or can you do this? And I've actually turned them down, which when you're, a relatively small business, relatively new business, that you don't really have that luxury. But I knew, and this comes back to your values and behaviors as well, I knew very early on that what I was trying to achieve with Zing Learning. And I also knew that I needed to be very careful with my values and behaviors and the impact I was having. So the partnership was really important because it helped me to know you as clients, air quotes there, my employers in some way, the way that my team, it feels in some way, actually were in it for the long haul. You weren't looking for a quick fix. You weren't looking for some silver bullet that was going to fix everything and make the culture all flowers and amazing. You knew that it was going to be hard work. You knew that you were going to have resistance. You knew that you were going to have some people that were so excited about this and wanted to get involved really early on, but you knew it was going to be a journey. So I think that partnership is something, and that's a big learning for me, for the other organizations that I work with, is like, please don't think that this one activity or this program is going to do everything that you need it to do. It needs to be much bigger than that. It needs to be a partnership. But also you mentioned the exec there. And in my experience in working with lots of exec on lots of different D&I projects, is that, the four of you are so engaged with this. You're also so different as well, which is really...
That's very true.
so different, yeah. Which is great, because then you've got diversity of thought in the exec, and that really shows through in the way that we're working on this project, in the way that you support each other. But the conversations are so genuine, and I've had some really great comments from other people that have attended sessions after one of you have been on there, and you've been very vulnerable and shared something about your own experience, and they have just felt so much more connected to the exec because of that. And we all know that that's a really big challenge in most organizations. So I think that for me, that's been one of the best ways that we've been able to see the change that we've been able to see, is because you're all not just on board, but you're leading this. It's not just words, it's actions, and people are feeling that.
I would agree with that, but I think, we can't not give credit to our trustees as well, and just even our new president and our former one, who've really said, like Jo said, our new president put it up there in his presidential speech. It's never been done before, to put it right at the forefront that we're a values-driven organisation. And I think that will mean a lot to people, whether it's new committee members or new volunteer members or new staff, that it's not just a glossy page, it is really saying, well, again, they're saying we're accountable for this. You can hold me to account for this. So, but I do think linking everything together, there are so many people that have gained from the experience. I don't know anyone that's walked away and said, I'm a worse person for it.
Yeah.
That harmed me in some way attending, it's actually made us more determined. And we know that there's still a lot of work to be done. I don't want us to be complacent. I also do want to say that, maybe clarify something, that there is nothing wrong with having a 2-day course or a 2-day seminar. And I think it's about context, and it's also about your culture and where you're coming from, because I think there are some places that may only need that, because it can be very thought-provoking. I've been on something, a half an hour sort of podcasty thing, and it just completely blew my mind what I learned on that thing. But I think what we were saying is that we knew that there had to be a lot of embedding. We knew what we were realistic about where we were coming from, and that's from both a staff and a member's side. And for us, the longer term fits us, you know, and it not only fits us because of who we are as an organization, it's because of where we want to be. But in different places, it may be something different. I think the important thing is to start, is to start off, take a step of courage, take a step of whatever it is. Some people will be in there with 2 feet, jumping straight in. Others will dip a toe in. Yeah, it takes time. And a lot of it is the unknown. Where is this taking me? And, I think the powerful thing is that we are, many of our members, and we're grateful for many of our members that have also stood up and been very vulnerable in situations where they may not have been necessarily been comfortable. And I think that's testament to the grounds that you've laid, that they feel comfortable. And, also having a values and behaviours champion, Royale, at that time really gave, I think it really gave members some confidence that this can be a safe place to talk about experiences.
I think if I'm being really honest, there was one session in particular I didn't realise I was going to struggle with before it happened. And even now, I haven't quite understood why it was very thought-provoking, very emotional for me. And I probably didn't quite engage as I would have in that session as perhaps others. But I do know now when the right time for me, I'll come back and have a look at that. And so at some point, there will be some topics I might want to revisit. And we've got the workbooks, we've got the videos. There's more importantly, what I didn't realize was going to happen is there's trusted spaces. So I can go and talk to other people within the organization, members and staff, when or if I feel comfortable at some point doing that. And I didn't realize that was going to be a legacy of this, for me personally anyway, and hopefully for others around that, where previously I think I'd had it in a very small group of individuals, or perhaps in the diversity and inclusion committee led by Isabel Pollock, where you had that sort of safe space as well. So I think that's interesting. The dialogue can continue, I think, is one of the legacies in a different way, in that trusted space.
Yeah, I think we've always been about the conversation ever since the George Floyd murder, when some staff came to us and said, can we start to have conversations? Because it can't go on as it's been before. And I think that was the start of how powerful a conversation can be, but you have to create a safe space for a conversation. And I think that's what you've created for us, that safe space, by us doing these workshops, us going back and having the conversations, thinking how we're constantly reinforcing that learning. I think it has created that place that the conversations continue. And as long as you're having conversations, you have the opportunity to grow and to learn from them. So I hope that they do continue.
Yeah, no, it definitely feels like it's really starting to embed now, which is obviously it's very enjoyable from my point of view, because you get to see the fruits of your labour, which doesn't happen very often with the work that I do, because I might be with a client for a month or two, it might even be a year, but with us, because it's such a long partnership, I can see the way in which things are changing, which is just so rewarding from my part. And I know you both agree with that from your part. You said there, Bims, as well, just before, with regards to the George Floyd murder, and that sparked the conversations. I know there were just kind of focus groups around let's talk about
race. That's correct.
And that was obviously pre us learning, pre our program. So that comment you said much earlier, which is, sometimes just do something, do something rather than nothing. Don't wait for everything to be perfect. Don't wait for a very strategic whatever. Just do something, listen to your people. And I know you were working on D&I even before that as well. That wasn't the catalyst for you to take D&I seriously. I'm doing that in but it was another thing that you were like, do you know what? Okay, we can't continue to ignore the elephant in the room, which is that actually maybe we're not as comfortable as we would like to be talking about these things, and let's make them a little less taboo. We're
absolutely
experiencing in some way some of these different aspects.
And I think if we go back to the original strategy established, and then coming alongside it are new values and all the work there, then there are incidences in the public, the tragedies, the challenges, etc., that maybe spark debate But I suppose what I'm trying to say is that we're not doing this for political reason.
Yeah, okay.
That actually we're doing this because it's at the core of our organisation, and we're on a long journey. And at times it can look like, or potentially spin off into a political sphere, but actually it's not our cause at all. Our cause is actually listening to our members and our staff and trying to support them through difficult periods because of our values, because of where we want to be with ED&I. And I think that's an important lesson I've sort of learned across. And at times, I get confused between the two, and you just talking it through centers you again about why you're doing something. And I think that's an important point to make.
I think that's a really good point you make, because so often when there is animosity towards D&I, people think there's always a political motive. And, quite frankly, some of our members think that, maybe some of our staff do too, and they've been quite vocal about that. And for me, there's a kind of sadness attached to that, because actually all we want to be done is treated like humans and to be valued. And most people at the core actually think, well, there's nothing wrong with that either. So I think you're right, Jo, to say it's not about the political reasons. And it's been well proved, and you said it yourself, Jo, Zoe, that the diversity of thought is so important. But it's more than diversity of thought, it's diversity of who's in the room. Because I remember a certain politician using that word when challenged by a reporter about how many ethnic minorities were in his team. And he was just spluttering away and using the word diversity of thought. I thought, what does that mean? Does that mean you take into account the tea lady, the cleaner? What does that mean? But actually it's who's in the room. And we've all seen it. We've seen fantastic D&I statements on companies, and you go and look at their management and leadership. There's no diversity in those teams. So where is this diversity that you're talking about? And yet you can say you have diversity of thought because you've got people at different levels in the organisation. But actually, at the top, you're still the same. You're still the same demographic. So for me personally, it is about, what are you really? What is the picture that people see when they step into the building, or when it's online? What do they see at meetings? Who do they see at meetings? Do they see diversity around the table in order to have that diversity of thought? And that's, I think, is still a challenge. We've still got some way to go. But that's, we can't be naive about this. It does take time, and you have to do it the right way. There are things to respect, and there's that have to be done. But the most important thing is we are seeing aspects of change that have all been very positive, I believe, for the institution. And that can only reflect for our membership, it will reflect for our staff. And I think, you said earlier about what does success look like. The success for staff has been the fact that we've been able to move up in our Investors in People accreditation. That huge amount of that has been down to diversity and inclusion, and about our values work. There was no doubt 3-4 years ago, we couldn't even answer a question on it because we didn't have anything. We just literally couldn't put any questions around that because we didn't have it. So I do think there is success that's there, and we can celebrate where we've come, but we mustn't be complacent about where we could be. I mean, the great thing about IMECI is that we innovate with very little sometimes. And I think that's the best way. When we were children, you started from something very small before you created whatever contraption you were doing. And that's the power in what do you have available? What can you make out of it? What can someone else add to it? And I think the more we allow others to add, so the better we're going to be, and the stronger we're going to be, and the more relevant we're going to be.
Relevant's a good word. Jo, you've mentioned a couple of times the word reflection, and that what that's done for you, whether it's that you're going to reflect in a little bit of time and you've had time for some of the content to make more sense in your mind, but also that idea of actually reflecting on how far you've come as an organisation. Yeah, of course, we can't get complacent. There's lots more work to do. But actually, if you think about the strategy, pre-strategy, the strategy, the learning, where we're going next, actually, sometimes I think organizations think they're miles behind and they need to be this, that, and the other. But you've reflected and you've gone, wow, we've actually come a really, really long way. But you're also doing that personally in your own reflection, in your own work, and the way in which you're challenging your own preconceptions and things like that in general, and having those conversations. So I think that's a really good message for other organizations that might be listening to this to take away. You have to reflect this is a big part of the learning program, isn't it? We are reflecting on our own personal impact on other people. We are reflecting on the way in which we've experienced things that perhaps we didn't necessarily realize were that bad at the time, because we just didn't have the understanding and the knowledge to comprehend that at that point.
I think part of that pause in reflecting is also then ensuring there's that legacy. And by legacy, I mean, it could be really practical, is that we, from an institution, we change volunteers every year, staff come and go over a period of time. So we don't want it to be just in the moment. I think so. Part of that reflection is making sure that our communications, our materials, our behaviors, everything, it reflects our new sort of learning, so that when we onboard a new person, they understand the new IMechE in a sense, or that a new member will come along and they understand from all our literature and our communications, oh, I see where IMechE fits in the DEI picture or inclusivity. So the reflection bit, as well as therefore how we're going to improve and keep going, like Bim says, how do we're not finished yet, but it's also to sort of help bring on board the new people in IMechE, to create that sense of belonging and the wider things about how we do things as well as what.
I think as we go further down, and it's really important that we hit the regions, that we look at what's going on at grassroots, because there's some amazing stuff out there, and they probably have no idea what we're doing because we seem so far away, but actually we're closer than we think in a lot of ways. And I think you're right, we've got to make those connections, and I think the more we do this, the more there's a meeting at some point where we think, oh, we are on the same journey together. And I want to do more. I want to step up. I'd like to be a volunteer. I'd like to see where I can contribute. And I think that's really important.
I think one of our future phrases working with you, Zoe, in Zing Learning is around providing a much wider platform of tools and communications that anyone can access, including the wider membership. And I think that's
our inclusion, isn't it?
And all the different types of communication. So from a podcast to a one pager to a booklet, to all the different types, to make sure that we resonate with a wider audience, because everyone learns in different ways. So I think part of actually going back to my point about legacy, but also what we're going to do next, is actually how do we communicate in the right ways with the diversity of our audience.
Yeah, and also not forgetting we're a global institution, so some people are a little bit harder to physically reach as well, so making sure that they're included.
That's a really good point.
I love that you're talking a lot about, I've heard the word belonging quite a few times, which makes my heart sing, because that's a step further than inclusion. We've obviously talked a lot about inclusion, but also it's sounding like, and I know this just from having conversations with you in general, that you understand the concept that diversity, like bringing more diversity into the world of engineering, into the IMechE in general, that's not going to fix things. What that does need to definitely happen, but it needs to happen at the same time as that inclusion work, because what you don't want to do is bringing lots more different people, different backgrounds, different life experiences, and plonk them in an organization, in a membership space, whatever it might be, and they just don't feel comfortable at all. Like they feel so out of place. So that concept that you're wanting this legacy to continue, you want to make sure these conversations are being had outside of the workshops in general anyway. That's what creates inclusion and belonging. And that means then we can bring diversity in and put that at the forefront, because we know we're bringing people into a space where they can be themselves. And it's only getting better week on week on week kind of thing. And it's interesting because whenever I speak to a new client, they always say, should I focus on diversity or inclusion first? Which one should I focus on first? And I always tell them to, do you know what? Just do it at the same time, because you need the diversity to bring that different perspective and to bring those additional skills and talents and completely different ways of working perhaps. But also you need to make sure that it's nice for them to come into. Nobody wants to go in to their career, to a working world, to membership duties, whatever it is, and feel like they can't speak out, feel like they can't give ideas, feel like they can't be themselves and they have to hide versions of themselves to be accepted. It's exhausting. We want people to be able to come and reach their full potential and bring all of themselves into what they do. So I love that we're talking about belonging, And it's just really nice if I think about the language we were using 18 months ago, and it was very inclusive. But now, knowing that we've been through all of these different sessions together, the language you're using is the language that I would encourage. So yeah, I'm doing some reflecting during this podcast, which is really nice. On the theme of reflection then, I'd love to know what you're most proud of so far on this journey. So I'll throw that out to whoever can think of an answer first.
Gosh, that's a good question. We haven't sat down and reflected like this for some time, have we? So it's quite a nice opportunity, Zoe, to do it. But we might need to pause for thought for this one.
I think I mentioned it before that when we go into, the beginning of the session, you ask us how much we think we know about a certain topic. And, hands up, sometimes I thought, well, I know, I think I'm about an 8 or a 10 or something. And other times, and, honestly, at times I felt a bit intimidated by everyone in the room would think because I'm an HR director, I should know everything. And I don't, even if it's a subject that should be close to me. So I've almost felt like I'm not really sure what I want to put down. And sometimes I have known more than I thought, but other times I haven't. And I think what I'm most proud about now is that actually I don't really care at the beginning of the session. If I only know about 3, I'm going to put 3. So my confidence has grown, that I don't have to worry that anyone's going to judge me because because I don't know about a certain subject. Because what it says to me is that I now am comfortable saying that I need to learn more. But other times I thought I knew something. But when I came out of the session, I actually realized when I went in, I was actually lower than the thing. But I think that for me is, going back to about improving ourselves, being honest with ourselves, reflection. I think I'm actually proud that I can do that. And I hope that even if I go on something else externally, I have that same courage, to do that. Because you do kind of get stuck into a kind of thing. It's like, I know everything about privilege or not or whatever, but it's not true at all. And a lot of that learning comes from other people's talking about their experiences, which I think you give a lot of space for in the workshops, because you can't knock someone's learned experience. No matter what a textbook says, it is not learned experience. And if someone says, this is how I feel, or this is how I am, or this is what I want to be, then we have to respect that person. And that also brings the belonging element in for me, So for me, that's what it might sound small, but for me, it's a big thing.
No, it definitely doesn't sound small. And actually, I don't know if you remember, obviously, I'm not going to test you on it right now, but all of those key behaviors of an inclusive leader, humility is one of the most important aspects. So for us to kind of think, do you know what? I feel safe. I don't feel like I'm going to be judged for not being the expert in whatever this topic is. But for us to kind of put our hands up and go, do you know what? Let's just figure it out. It doesn't matter if I get it wrong, those sorts of things. And that's a huge shift. And we did, I don't know if you remember, we were actually talking about it in the D&I committee the other day, but we did very early on before we started, because we wanted to get a level of where people felt they were at with the learning. We asked them to scale themselves against lots of different things like humility and stuff like that. And we gave them statements to choose, and they could choose 1 out of 3. We know that people have scaled themselves relatively high on some of those. And when they do it again, at the end of their year of kind of going through the program, we know that some of them are actually going to score themselves even lower now. Because of that level of humility. And that is progress. It needs narrative around it when you put the data out to people, but that's progress because people are like, oh, okay, I didn't know as much as I thought I knew, so I'm going to go and do some learning. I'm going to get curious about this particular thing.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, for me personally, I think it's without it sounding sappy, I think it's really inspired my learning of D&I issues, of things that I didn't know, even though I clearly knew someone, being a woman, being someone of colour or something, coming not maybe from the background that was necessarily give me that advantage in life. But I've come out of each one wanting to know more, and not so much about textbooks, because my learning comes from people, conversations, experiences, and everyone's different, but that's where I learn a lot from. Like there's something that Jo said that's going to stay with me all the time, because she might not think it's a big deal, but for me, it was a big deal because it really made me challenge myself and my thinking, And I think that's the important thing, is that that you're inspired when you come out of each session. And most people I know feel, I want to do better. I've learned and I want to do it. But they're also saying, I haven't learned it all just because I've been on a workshop now. I haven't, but I know I can do better. And I think that's really been enriching.
Thank you. Jo, you've had lots of time to think, but I know you've also been listening, because I've been watching you nod and agree with what Bims is saying.
Yeah, it all really resonates. It's an interesting one to narrow it down into one area for me. But there's something around when I was saying before about when the hairs stand up on your arm, the moments that
Goosebump moments,
yeah. I think for me, there's maybe been a couple of those, and I think one is I'm really proud of us as an organisation, and to be, if I'm honest, myself as an individual on occasion where I've actually spoken up on a topic that perhaps we wouldn't have in the past. So that bravery of the organisation, and at times I've been a little bit braver than I have been in the past, to speak up about the topic and stand by our values, which actually resonate very well with myself. And it's quite emotional when I think about it. It sort of means a lot. And I think that's happened not just with myself and as corporately, but I've seen it in others.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's just amazing when you see others feeling the I suppose the psychological security to actually have that conversation. And I couldn't be prouder of that for the organisation and ourselves, And I think, going back to your point, Bims, you can see that not only in your workspace, but you can see that in your own personal life.
Yeah,
it's so valuable in both elements, isn't it? Which I perhaps hadn't appreciated before this learning programme.
Our joy comes from seeing our staff, how they participate in things, whether it's the team briefing, whether it's sharing personal stories, and this happy space that they create for themselves, seeing them interact with each other, even just over, after traumatic 2 years, seeing the staff in the room talking to each other, talking outside of their own teams. You can see these amazing pictures of real joy. And, you thought, gosh, I wouldn't have thought we'd have seen those 2 years ago. And everyone's literally saying, what can I learn about this new person? How can I make them feel like they belong to IMECI? We saw the other day, our CEO put a shout out to a new member and just put it on Teams. We didn't do things that way before. You waited to the corporate induction and had a nice little formal session. But we've all said, well, how can we make other people belong? And other people were, high-fiving it or whatever they were doing. But I think it's really great. And, I do remember someone who started it. I don't think he could believe himself for the first week. He just kept on going around saying, I've never been in an organisation like this. I've never been in, because he was just meeting people who were going, hi, welcome on board, etc. But it wasn't, we're just doing it. They really were saying welcome. And, already they're making a mark. So there is, getting to these people that say it's all sappy and all the rest of it. It isn't. It makes sense to make someone have a sense of belonging and have a sense of value and having a sense they can contribute. And we need to make sure, though, that, going back to what Jo said, that we have a wider pool to do it. Because it doesn't need a few people to shoulder the load. It needs all of us to take that on, but have that single. That's why you need a strategy. That's why you need a framework, but to have a goal, where are we heading to? Every game has a set of rules, and that's a fact. And we do need that. That's why we need our values. There is a framework in which you can really do things, but it is important to have that framework, and it's important that people feel that sense of belonging when they come here.
One of the most important things now, it feels like, is taking what we've learned in that framework and embedding it in our long-term strategy.
Yeah, okay.
So for people will see on our website, etc., we're now really building that longer-term aspiration over the next 5, 10, 20 years. And such an important part of this now, in our legacy, is making sure it's embedded in that long-term strategy for the future.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was interviewing the leadership group from another organisation for some DEI audit work that I'm doing for someone else. And that was one of the questions. How do you embed D&I into your strategy? And actually they were very transparent, and they said, you know what, we don't at all, but because there's such a lack of awareness. And I think the D&I strategy was great to really start to raise that, but this learning and the conversations and understanding it from a human level has definitely made a big difference with regards to the way that it's really being brought into that day-to-day and that strategy and things like that. I'm really sad to say that we're almost up with time, but before we do leave, because you know I love talking to you both anyway, I just want to ask if you've got any advice that you would give to any other organizations, whether they're membership organizations or not, that would help them to think about how to start to move forward with their D&I efforts.
I think for me, Zoe, looking back over the last few years, I'll probably go back to a point I made earlier about if you're on the start of that journey or a little way in it, you spend a bit of time in the planning phase, the learning phase, the consultation phase, before you start. So get to know how your organisation, all its stakeholders feel around D&I. Almost take the temperature check, I think, around it before you commence, because how you do it is so important. Because listening to all the conversations today, you know, the program has worked for so many reasons because of the way we did it. And I think that's really important, to know the best way of learning for your organisation and your stakeholders, I think would be, and that valuable time at the beginning has helped us progress, I think, perhaps maybe quicker than we might have if we'd taken a different learning route.
I think that I agree with you, and I think as an organisation you've got to have an honest appraisal of who's best to start that, who's best to facilitate that. Mm-hmm. So if your organisation and you know it's struggling for whatever reasons, you might need to bring in someone else to start doing that consultation and that planning, so that there's trust there, because we were very fortunate in that our staff and our members did talk to us. But if you don't have that openness initially, you may have to bring in someone to stimulate it before you can even get to that planning stage, because you don't know where you want to be until you know where you started from. And I think that's really important. Added to that, I think you also have to be honest with yourself and knowing that it's not going to be smooth all the way through. There will be times it's very uncomfortable for individuals, for staff, perhaps management. But by taking the step and saying, I'm prepared to do it, in itself speaks volumes. People will step back and say, what's going to happen? Let's wait and see. You mustn't be knocked by cynicism. You mustn't be knocked by the people that said, oh, you can't do it, or the people that say, oh, we've tried it before. You have to still be determined to make a difference. So for me, I think added to what Jo said, it's those bits around it that are also important, and to have someone to talk to if you feel you're struggling with that. But I think if you have to hold on. You have to hold on and not think it's a 2-day wonder thing. Even if your workshop is for 2 days, you have to wait for change to happen. But what you have to do, that embedding, you have to think about a bit wide about what would embedding this do? What does it mean we change? Do we start with our newsletter? What are we going to start as visible evidence of embedding? You know, so I think that all has to come into that planning stage as well.
And I just add at the end there, I'm thinking who might listen to this podcast, and there are some organisations with large resources, some without. And I think I would say there are ways to start the discussion without large resources. It's having that sort of creating safe spaces, having the conversations doesn't need to cost money. It's the approach to it, which we've talked about, I think. So my advice would be, don't worry so much about resource, just sort of have a think about how you start that conversation within your organisation.
Yeah. And use the tools available now. You know, we're online so much, you know, we can get so much more inclusive than we used to be before. So that's already a little point that they can score off if they're holding a Zoom meeting with some people that were willing to participate in the conversation. You know, perhaps they wouldn't have done that before. It might have been the HR team, might have been someone coming to talk to the exec team. Just put it out there. We'd like to have a conversation. And that's inclusion from the start. So so you can tick off a little thing and say, I've started. and we should use everything available to us because, the opportunity's there. I would say to everybody, don't be afraid of it. I agree with what Jo said. Whether you're small, medium, big organisation, there's an opportunity for everyone to make. It's not one size fits all, and I think that's really important to say.
I think to live by that point in our values, then if anyone listening to this podcast wants any advice, we're welcome to speak to them.
Definitely. And I imagine that, there's going to be employees and members of the IMechE that are going to listen to this as well. So, it's been brilliant. And I'm so glad that we've still got a way to go because it's just been amazing. Having the members and the employees working together on this has really made a difference to the way that people are perceiving things as well. So it's been really, really lovely to watch that. And I'm so glad I'm only a third of the way through with cohort 2. We're not quite finished with cohort 1 yet, and I've still got cohort 3 to go. So from my point of view, I get a lot of joy from this. I give a lot of energy, but I get so much back. And just seeing the way in which people are able to bring more of themselves into their careers and things like that is so rewarding, and it's lovely to watch. But okay, that's it. Thank you so much, both of you, for the conversation. I know that this is going to be really helpful to lots of different types of organizations, and also members and employees that are going to listen to this are probably going to enjoy hearing your reflections on it and how you think it's really supported the IMechE in general. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Zoe. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, we've loved talking to you.
Look forward to further conversations.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Sadly, that's all we've got time for today. I'm sure you would have loved to have got even more advice from Jo and Bims and the Institution of Mechanical Engineers there. But we've got some really great takeaways. There's definitely some advice I think that other employers can really take on board to really think about how to get their diversity and inclusion strategy off the ground. Obviously, learning is a great way to do it, but there's also some other tips that we were just given there. So please take them away, use them with your employees and see if you can really make a difference, not just internally within your organisation, but also within the communities that you do serve. It's really, really powerful, the work that can be done if we really put our minds to it.